Hey guys, this is Mathieu Frémaux aka Frameworks. This video is a quick start tutorial for you to use my MoglyphFX toolset version 4. So without any waiting, let's go ahead and get started. So this is the UI panel of MoglyphFX divided in 3 tabs called Cloners, Effectors and Other. And the first thing you'll need to create in your composition, except if you want to clone some text instead of glyph shapes. In this case, you will find the mod text that has been added to version 4 here in this drop-down menu. At the very bottom of the list will be these 2 guys here in green icons. In this case, and only in this case, you will have to select these ones first before creating your cloners. So since this is only a quick start tutorial, I won't talk about these options right now, and I will just ignore them. And we'll stick with the other options that are there in this drop-down list. So now, all you're gonna do is to create a new cloner in your composition. So it really depends on what you need to achieve. Let's say you want to duplicate some shapes in a radial array. And as you can see in the Cloners tab, there is a button called Radial, and I can click on that. And I will end up with a new layer called MoglyphF Cloner Radial, perfectly centered in my composition. So if I select it, I can see that there is a MoglyphF Cloner effect onto it. The effect is divided in 2 categories, which is object and transform. And you need to know that all the different cloners work the same way. So they are all based on the same hierarchy, which is first to be the object and second to be the transform. So if I click on another cloner, because you can have multiple cloners inside a same composition. So let's create a grid cloner, for example, in order to clone the squares in a grid way, like this. Of course, you can move your cloner layers and transform them like any other After Effects layer. So now I have 2 cloners in the same composition, and if I have a look at how it's working inside the effect stack for both of them, this is exactly the same kind of hierarchy. So it's called MoglyphF Cloner for both of them. And if I twill down the first group, which is called object for the radial one, and if I now twill down the object group for the grid one, I can see that the options differ from each other. And this is of course because each of those cloners are different, right? So all the options that are specific to each clone type will be in the object group. So if I have a grid, for example, on this right, I can go there in the object group, and as you can see, there are some options to create more or less columns. So I can tweak these options to have more or less columns on X, or more or less rows, of course, and I can play with the X gap and Y gap, of course. And if I go to the radial one, I can play with the radius because this is a circle, right? So I can go there and tweak the ring radius, change the number of clones by changing the count. And there are also some options that are identical for each cloner, and this is a clones mode here, which with this iterate drop-down menu. As you can see in the grid, there is also this clones option. I can't tell you much about that right now because it's a bit more advanced, but we will see that a bit later. Each cloner comes with its own set of options, and for the radial cloner, I can maybe add more to the count, and I can choose to not align clones along the path, which gives me this nice cartwheel effect, and I can play with the rotation completion and the rotation offset, and yeah, you have this nice cartwheel animation. And yeah, let's undo that. And the second group is called transform, and this is where you will be able for each cloner to transform all the clones at the same time with the exact same value. So if you twill down this option, you can, for example, change the color of the field. So this is green by default because it's defined by this color here in the UI panel, but I can change it by clicking that, for example, and as you can see, the clones are now pink instead of green. Just to let you know, you can select multiple cloners in your composition and just click on this option in the UI panel to change the color on the fly for all the selected cloners. So I will undo that, and I will stick with the green color here. Okay, so let's select your radial cloner again. So you have the fill color to play with, you have the stroke color and the stroke thickness. So if I increase the stroke thickness, I can change the color right there. So let's undo that. And I can play with rotation Z. This is important to know that we are dealing by default with 2D layers, so the rotation in 2D is what is called rotation Z, and of course you'll be able to play with rotation X and Y only if you are in 3D. So if I select the radial cloner and click on this toggle option, which is 2D to 3D in my UI panel, as you can see the gizmo has changed and we are now in 3D, and now I can play with the rotation Z and the rotation Y. Okay, cool. So let's undo that a few times to retrieve our 2D version of our clones. So if I keep showing what's going on in the transform, you have also the center, you have on X and Y, of course, you have the position X and position Y, of course, since this is constrained to a radial shape. If you play with the position X on a radial cloner, it will just turn the clones along the path, and if I play with position Y, it will move them and create a bigger circle or a smaller one. If I do the same in the grid cloner, it will be different because it's not constrained in a closed path. So if I go to transform for the grid, play with position X, it will go, of course, on the right, and if I play with position Y, it will move vertically. And of course you can play with scale X and scale Y. Okay, cool. So this is it for the set of options you'll find in transform group. So now let's take a moment to discover what are the other cloners. So if I click on brick, this is the one that was called honeycomb in previous versions of MoglyphFX, but now it's renamed brick because it's shorter. And as you can see, this is similar to the grid cloner because if I deploy this object group, I can play with the count X, which is the number of columns maximum, and the count Y, which is the number of rows. And this is an alternated version of the grid because you have alternate even and odd counts on each row, and I can invert the order of odd and even rows, and I can play with the X gap and the Y gap. And of course this kind of distribution is perfect if you want to create honeycomb with hexagons, for example, or some bricks for a wall or this kind of stuff. So this is it for the brick cloner. Now let's talk about the spiral cloner that was formerly named Fibonacci cloner in previous version of MoglyphFX. So if I click on spiral, you will end up with this really nice distribution that kind of mimics what you find in nature with plants' phyllotaxis, because it's based on the golden angle. So if I drill down this object group, I'll see that there is a spiral golden angle that is 137.5, which is exactly the golden angle, but you can change it to whatever you want. So if I type 0, I can see that now I only have these clones that are now in line, and if I play with this angle, I can see that I'm progressively creating a spiral. So this is really cool. You can have all kinds of spiral stuff thanks to this nice spiral cloner, and I strongly advise you to have a look at their dedicated section in the version 3 demo overview. So this is where you'll find out about all these options because there are a lot of them, and maybe I can just show you that you can just uncheck the normalize clones size in order to have them bigger, and you can tweak the center and outwards downsizing if you don't want this clones to become smaller in the center, and you can invert the downsizing effect if you prefer, and you can uncheck the align clones if needed, and yeah, you have the number, the count of clones, of course, You can play with the spiral radius. You can play with the bias, which is, if you type U on your keyboard, a way to play with curves. So if I easy ease the keyframes here, and if I go in the graph editor, I can go in the value graph and I can change the way the spiral distributes the clones. So this is really cool, really advanced stuff, but yeah, I strongly advise you to have a look at the dedicated section in version 3 video overview. So this is it for the MoGlyph spiral cloner. And next one is called linear. So if you click on that, there will be a little modal window that will ask you if you prefer to align your cloner on the first left clone, which is this one, or to center the cloner onto the middle one, which is this one. So if you click yes, it will be aligned on the first one, just like in Cinema 4D's Mograph module. But if you click no, it will be centered on this one. And this is usually what I prefer to do, so I will click no. And if you drill down the object group, you can see that in offset you have an expression. This is because I've chosen to click on no in the modal window. And if I increase the count, as you can see, the clones are distributed in a line. And if you go there in the group that is called per step transform, that is not to be confused with the regular transform group that you have seen before. And if I drill down the per step transform, well, this is why you will be able to make the clones be closer to each other by playing with this position X value. And same for Y, you can have the clones moving vertically. And you have also the ability to play with the scale X and scale Y, and also to rotate your clones, of course. And this is very nice if you want to have a distribution of clones that is transformed iteratively. So this is it for the linear cloner. So just to let you know, there are a few shortcuts assigned to some of the buttons of MoglyphFX, and the linear cloner is one of them. So if you are annoyed by the fact that the linear cloner is always asking you if you prefer to align your clones on the first or the center one, you can just ignore that and shift click this button. As you can see, if I go over the button with my mouse cursor, the help tip is telling me that Shift will align on first clone and Alt Shift will align on center. So if I shift click on this button, it will just skip the modal window and force the alignment to be on the first clone. So let's undo that. And now if I hold down both the Shift key and the Alt key while clicking this button, I will create the same thing, but this time the cloner will be aligned on the middle one. Okay, so let's finish the cloner's overview by showing you the Spline Cloner. But if you try to click on the Spline Cloner, you will end up with this message that is popping up. And it tells you that you have to select a shape layer first. Okay, so let's do that. I will first draw a Bezier path thanks to the Bezier tool right there. Okay, let's do a simple shape. And now if I select this shape layer, I can click on Spline Cloner. And you will be prompted, just like for the linear cloner, to choose between two options. The first one, if I click on the yes button, will create a count mode, which is the mode that was used in previous versions of MoglyphFX. And it's still there, of course, because you could need that. But the second one now is the ability to clone on the path points instead. So let me show you the first option, which is yes, and which is the count mode. And as you can see, you have now the squares that are cloned along the path. And if I play with the object group, I have the ability to play with the count option. So I can have more or less clones along the path. And the cool thing is that I can animate the clones along the path. So I can play with the start and end parameters, let's say like playing with the end option, and I can then play with the offset that allows me to make my clones travel along the path, which is really, really nice. So you can use that specific cloner type to draw custom trajectories designs with arrows or similar shapes. So this is really, really useful and powerful. And this is the first option, which is the count mode if I click on yes. But now let's hide this one, click on the shape again. And now if I click again on Spline Cloner and choose no, you will end up with another distribution on each path point. So this is a new feature that has been introduced in MoGlyph version 4, and it's really powerful too. So if I twirl down the content of my shape layer, and if I try to select the points, as you can see, those are the points of my path, and every clone follows exactly the points of my path. So this is really, really nice. I can, of course, animate the path, and the clones will stick to the path points, as you can see here. Okay, so let's undo that. And you have tons of options to play with this new Spline Cloner Point mod, but I can't tell too much about that right now because, again, this is just a quick start tutorial and this will be very long. So I strongly advise you to have a look at the whole in-depth video overview of version 4 in order to fully understand the power and flexibility of this new Spline Cloner in point mod. So you can clone on tangents, you can choose to replace the clones by some text, which is really awesome too. Let me show you briefly. So you can display the coordinates of your points, you can display the IDs of your points. And yeah, this is really, really powerful and interesting. So please watch the video overview of version 4 for more information about that. And for me, this is the end of this cloner part. So I've shown all the available cloners to you, and just to finish on this part and before diving inside the Effectors tab, there are still a few other things I need to show you that are also in the cloners tab. So let me remove all of this. So let's create a grid cloner. So you can toggle this to be 3D if needed. As you have seen before, you can change the color of the fill, the color of the stroke there, and change the thickness of the stroke too if needed. So just go there and tweak them here. And you can also change the default shape, which is this square that you have seen since the beginning of this quick start tutorial. But of course, you don't have to clone a square every time. So maybe you want this shape to be a heart or an arrow, for example. So in order to do that, you will have to deal with what is called the glyph panel, and you access this with the Add New Glyph button. So you select your cloner. You first define which font you need to pick your shape from. So in this case, by default, this is called the MoGlyph Basic Geometry, and this is the very first one in the list. And this is by default what is chosen by MoglyphFX. And if you stick with this, and if you click on Add New Glyph, as you can see, now you have this very nice and convenient glyph panel that allows you to pick a shape in this grid of shapes. So you just have to know that every single font that comes with MoglyphFX is coming with exactly 10 by 10 glyphs. So you have exactly 100 shapes to play with, and which is different from for each font. So if I close that, and if I choose another font, maybe MoGlyph People, for example, as you can see now, I have all the shapes to play with. So it really depends on the font you choose in this drop-down list. So this is really important. So again, I will stick with the basic geometry, click on Add New Glyph, and by default, this is a square, but let's say I want to have this nice star shapes here. I can click on that, and now, as you can see, the square shape has been changed to become this star icon. And as you can see also, there is a new effect that is called Glyph 1 with a glyph ID that is numbered 97. And if you have a look at what's going on, if I go over this star shape with my mouse cursor, you can see a help tip that is showing me the number of the glyph, which is 97. So this is the same number here. So now, what if I want more than one shape? Well, you can choose another shape if needed. So I want to have maybe this circle shape here, which is number 51. And now if I don't want the circle to be green, I can also change the color from there. So let's change it to be maybe orange. And I can also choose the color of the stroke. If I click on that, I can have a stroke that is white, for example. And now if I click on the circle, as you can see, there is now a circle added to my glyphs. So I have the star and the circle, and they all have been set up with different colors for the fill and the stroke color, thanks to these options here. So now if I'm down, I can just close this glyph panel window here. But if I want to add another glyph to the setup, I can also go back to add new glyph after a while and click again on any other shape. Maybe I can choose this pentagon. And now, as you can see, I have my star, my circle, and my pentagon. I will undo that and just stick with the star and circle. And as you can see, its shape comes with its own glyph effect. So the glyph 1 in my case is this star shape, and the glyph 2 is this circle shape. And I can change the numbers after a while, of course, by playing with this slider. And if I want to know exactly which number I have to type, I can just select my cloner, click on Add New Glyph, and go over the shape I want with my mouse cursor. And let's say I want the circle to be this triangle here. It's glyph 99, okay? By going over with my cursor, I can see it, glyph 99. So I will close that, and I will change the glyph ID of my glyph 2, which is for my circle, to be 99. And I have changed my glyph to be the triangle shape. Okay, cool. So now, what if I don't want all my glyphs to be iterated like that? Well, this is why this option I've talked about before is there. So this is a clones with iterate drop-down menu here. And you have this option available for all the clone types. So if I don't want to iterate through these two shapes, I can change to randomize them. So I can change clones to not be iterate, but randomize. And now, as you can see, I have a random distribution of the shapes. And I can change the seed in this case. So if I play with the seed, I have a random distribution of the seed, which is also very cool. So now that you know how to deal with cloners and glyphs, I can show you how to use effectors. So let's dive into the second tab called Effectors. What makes MoglyphFX so powerful is its set of effectors. There are a lot of them. This is a quick start tutorial, so I won't showcase any single one, but I will try to do my best to explain how the plane effectors work so that you can understand the basics and go deeper on your own with other kind of effectors. So let's start with the plane effector. And to do that, I will just create a new grid cloner with basic geometry font. So let's click on grid cloner, go to effectors and add a plane effector. So once you have applied a plane effector, you will see all the clones go up and have a red color. And this is because of the default parameters. So I will explain that a bit later, but for now you have to understand that all the effectors except the group, because it's different from the others, all the other effectors are based on the same principle. So they are all built the same way with one effect called effector plus the name of the effector. And you can have several effectors stacked onto each other in the effect panel. And all the effectors are built with three different groups. The first group is where you will find all the options that are specific to each effector type. So for the plane effector, since this is the simplest one, you will just have the strength to play with. So if I reduce the strength slider and go up to 0, you won't see any effect. But if I go back to 100%, if I click on the little FX guy here next to the effect itself, it will disable the effect completely. So if you type 0, it's just the same as clicking on this FX button. But you also can go in negative values. So if I put this in negative 100, as you can see, the red color has become blue because it's a complementary color, and it has been pushed down towards the bottom of the comp because the y-axis is in the negative values. So you have 100, minus 100. And this strength option is available for all the effectors. So this is it for the plane effector. You don't have much options because this is the simplest one. You just have to understand that the plane effector will fully affect all the clones with the same value based on what is specified in the parameters group. And the parameters group is also the same for all the different effectors. So if I drill down the parameters, I can see that there are 3 different categories of parameters. You have transform, you have style, and you have other. In the transform, you will find all the transform parameters like anchor point, position, scale, skew, rotation, and visibility. And visibility is just another name for opacity. So you can decrease this value and you will decrease the opacity of your clones. So it's just a synonym of opacity. So if I activate the transparency grid, I can see that playing with visibility is just another way of dealing with opacity. And skew, if you skew them, you can change the skew angle just below, as you can see. And you can also rotate on Z in order to rotate all your clones. So I can also go to the style category, which is where you'll find the colors. So by default, the plane effector is unchecked on the colors from cloner option, but all the other effectors are checked on this option. So if I tick this guy on, I will retrieve the colors defined by the colors I have in fill color, stroke color, in the MoGlyph cloner itself, right? So the fill color was green, the stroke color was pink in my case. So this is the same. If I tick these colors from cloner option on, it will be the same than defined in the transform of the MoGlyph cloner. So green for the fill and pink for the stroke. But as soon as I tick this guy off, I will be able to define other colors for the fill color and the stroke color. So let's do that. I can change, for example, this to be orange for the fill, and maybe I can change it to be blue for the stroke. Of course, there isn't any stroke for now, but I can also, in the style, so let's twirl up this guy here. Let's concentrate on the style of the effector plane. So if I play with we are still in the still category, right? So at the bottom of this category, you also have the stroke thickness, and I can play with the thickness here, and you can see the color of the stroke color as defined here. You also have a few more styling options like fill opacity. So let's reduce that to see what's going on. And let's turn on the transparency grid. And as you can see, I can only play with the fill opacity there. And with the stroke opacity, that's the same for the stroke. And those two parameters are different from the transform visibility, because if I play with visibility, it will transform the opacity of both the fill and the stroke. Okay, so this is important to keep in mind. And you have the fill hue. Okay, you have the fill brightness. You have the stroke hue and the stroke brightness as well. So this is it for the styling category. And let's dive into the third and last other category. And you have the spacing first. So if I play with spacing option, as you can see, it spaces the glyph from each other. And I will undo that. You can go negative in order for them to be closer to each other. And I can also blur on X and Y my glyphs. So if I do that on X, it will do that. If I do that on Y, it will be a directional blur that is vertical. I can have, of course, both of them being applied. And I have also two other last ones that are very useful, but they are a bit more complex to understand. So let me try to explain that. In order for you to understand that, I will select it and click on Add New Glyph. And now what I will do is to go over any shape with my mouse cursor. Let's say, for example, this crossed circle here, that is the glyph number 76, as you can see when I hover this shape with my mouse cursor. And if I specify in the modify glyph something that is not 0, so 76 in this example, I will change all my shapes to be exactly this exact same shape I've chosen here. So you can go in the glyph panel by clicking this Add New Glyph button anytime, and by hovering all the shapes with your mouse cursor and seeing what is the number of the shape you want. Okay, so let's again choose something, and maybe this star here, which is 97. Let's type 97, and again, the shape has changed to this shape. And to understand the other one, let's zero this one out. I will first add some shapes, like maybe these cross shapes here, and maybe this circle target shape here. So now if I have a look at what's going on here, if I disable my transparency grid, I can see that I have this cross as a first clone and the circular target here as a second clone. And let's, by the way, go to style again and change the stroke thickness to 0, because I don't want to see this stroke thickness. So if you go back to other group, the offset glyphs means that you will be able to offset the number of the ID of the glyph relatively to the shape it is. So in this example, I have this shape and this shape. If I want to offset my glyph to be exactly this one for the cross and this one's for the circle target, I can specify to offset glyph by 3, because this is the actual shape. And if I go 1, 2, 3, I've got this one. And if I take the circle target, I can come here and count 3, 1, 2, 3, and I will have this one. So if I type in offset glyph 3, it will offset the shapes exactly as I said. So this is the new cross that you have now, and this is the new circle target you have now. So yeah, this is how you deal with offset glyph, and of course you can put anything you want, and you can even go negative in order to have some shapes that are before the ones that are there. So I had this cross and this circular shape here. So if I go -2, for example, I will end up with this one and this one. So let's try that. And again, yeah, this is this one and this one. So this is how to deal with these two options, modify glyph and offset glyph. A bit more advanced, but really interesting possibilities. Okay, so the last part of each effector, and this is really important to understand because it's a fundamental concept in MoglyphFX, is the falloff. So in order for me to demonstrate the falloff, I will first create a new composition and a new setup, and I will hold down both the Alt key and the Shift key on the linear button, so Shift plus Alt. And this way I create a new linear cloner that is perfectly centered on its middle clone. And then I will drill down this guy and add more to the count, maybe 20. And in the transform, I will transform the scale X and scale Y to be smaller, maybe 50%. And in the per step transform, I will zero out the position Y and maybe 100 in position X, a bit less, just in order to see the extremities here, and that's perfect. So now if I apply in the effector panel a plane again, and if I increase a bit the parameters, transform, position Y, and maybe something like -600, and if I move the whole layer here, I can play with the Falloff options that are here in the effector plane. And by the way, all the effectors have this Falloff group. So if you drill down this guy here, you will see a bunch of options you can play with. And by default, this is completion from to 0, completion to 100%. And you can then play with completion offset with minus value until minus 100 to animate the state that is defined by your effector towards the state that is defined previously by the MoglyphF cloner. And if you play with the completion offset from there to there, so minus 100 to plus 100, you will be able to animate all your clones with this nice transition. So this is a bit harsh as a transition, so maybe I can decrease the completion to something that is less wide, so something like 50, for example. And if I play with completion offset a bit more, like maybe 25%, I can see now that I have this nice transition. And if I play a bit more, you can see that there are some intermediate states between this state and this one. And this is due to the smoothness. The smoothness by default is 100, so it is smooth, but you may not want that. So I will zero the smoothness here, and I will also zero out the ease high, and I will also zero out the ease low. And then if I play with the completion offset again, I will see that my animation now is perfectly like hard cut transitions. And this is perfect if you want to, let's say, create retro Pac-Man gamings or those kinds of designs. And this is nice, but now I will be able to show you that you can change this shape here, which is this hard square, by going inside the Effectors tab and by going here at the very bottom of the Effectors tab. And there you have 4 buttons that are all pink, and this is this option, this option, this option, and this option that is for now grayed out, but I will tell you why it is grayed out just after a while. And right now, if I select in the effects stack here in the effect panel, if I select my effector plane, and if I change this option here, which is the middle one, I can change the shape of my Falloff transition. So by default, this is square Falloff, and this is exactly what happens in the icon if you have a look at how it has been designed. So this is exactly the same here. And if I play with the ramp up Falloff instead, I will see this very nice transition that is linear, but that goes from left to right. So first clone to end clones. And if I now select the ramp down Falloff, which is the exact inverse, I will have the exact opposite. So this is nice. And again, if you play with completion offset, you can just keyframe that and have this nice animation from one state to the other. And don't forget that anything we have seen previously, so the ability to play with scale, rotation, and colors and fill and strokes, and even the blurs and the offset and modify glyphs, well, everything we have seen before is still compatible with all that. And now if I select the triangle Falloff, I can click on it, and it will give me this very nice triangular distribution. And if I change it to round Falloff, it will be this kind of organic dome-like transition. And the last one is smooth one, and I really love this one because it gives me this really nice organic natural animation. So you may have noticed that you have already encountered these names before. And you are right, this is because all the effectors of MoglyphFX are just some text animators. And if I drill down my layer here, I will find my effector plane here, which is a text animator that has the exact same name as the corresponding effect in the effects panel. And if I twirl down this guy, I have the Falloff that is just a range selector. So this is exactly the same as this. But I've linked everything to these options here, so you don't have to twirl down all these guys. So you have this really convenient way to play with all this in the Falloff group. And yeah, this is completion from, you have completion to, completion offset. Again, this is how you keyframe your animation, or you can just dual this thing out and play with maybe the square Falloff. So again, you have to select it and change it to square Falloff. And you can just, if you want to start from 0, animate the completion from 0 to 100. And now you have also an animation that is this way, which is very harsh. Maybe this is something you want. And you can still add some smoothness here by adding a bit of smoothness, and maybe ease things a bit. If you don't want to be exactly in the middle here, you can play with ease high and ease low. And yeah, this is how you deal with Falloff shapes. And next thing you can do with the Falloff is to randomize it. So by default, it is not randomized because the toggle button here showing you a 1, 2, 3 numbers in its icon. And if you select your effector and if you click on that, it will randomize your Falloff instead. And as you can see, the previous icon with the 1, 2, 3 numbers has changed to something new, which is looking like a shuffle icon with a double arrow. Basically what it has done is it has changed the range selector inside the effector plane text animator to be randomized. Okay, so it has randomized here, and once you have checked this toggle on, okay, so you can always come back to index-based order, or you can randomize it by clicking again on it. And as you can see, as I do that, I have this last icon here that is grayed out when it's index-based, but it's now enabled if I'm in the random mode. So if I have my effector selected, take a look at the randomized source here, which is 1 by default. If I click on that, it will randomize the Falloff, right? And this is why you see the random source changing. And by the way, you can do that with multiple effectors. So in order for me to show you, I can select my cloner again and add a second plane effector, and I will go to parameters, style, and maybe change the color to something like blue, for example. And I can maybe rotate them. Okay, perfect. And if I now go to Falloff, play with completion to, as you can see, it is already randomized because when I clicked on plane effector, it has kept this option on. So I was in randomized Falloff mode. And if I play with completion offset and I twirl down the 2 effector plane Falloff, you can see the randomized source here is 326 and here it's 1. So if I select both of them and if I play with this seed, I can change both seeds together, which is very cool. And you can have a lot of effectors selected, by the way. I can also click again on this option in order to retrieve something based on indices. And I can also change, of course, the shape that as I demonstrated to you before. And yeah, this is it for these options. And the other options here and there are more related to text layer. Speaking of text layers, if I create a new composition, I will show you that all the effectors of MoglyphFX also work with native text layers. So if I type something like this is a native After Effects text layer, which is of course not something created by MoglyphFX, so it's not a cloner. And if I go to character tab and maybe center it with the baseline shift like that, you have some words separated by spaces and you have different lines also. So if you go to MoglyphFX, if I apply a plane effector, as you can see, it has stayed with the last random option we had chosen. So I will click on it to retrieve the index-based falloff. And if I have this smoothness, this is because I had changed the shape to be smooth, but I will go back to square. And now I have the exact same effect I had before with my squares. So if I select my text and if I go to this option here, I can change the falloff to not be based on glyph, which is characters, but per word or per line. So if I play with the falloff of the effector plane, if I change the completion to something else, as you can see by default, it's now per glyph, so it's per character. You can clearly see that there. But if I select my effector and click on this guy here, if I change it to be falloff per word, now if I play with completion offset, I can see that this is now the words that are affected by the plane effector. Maybe the position Y isn't the best thing to demonstrate that, so I will go to parameters, transform, 0 the position Y, and play with the scale a bit, so something like 20 and 20. Perfect. So the falloff completion offset, as you can see now, it's by word. And if I select my effector again and change that to be falloff per line, it will now, of course, be an animation based on lines. Okay, so this is very cool if you want to animate text layers. And this is it for this fourth option. And you have almost the same setting next to it on the left. But as you may notice, this is not the same color. So everything that is pink is related to falloff, which is this one. And if you have a look at these icons, they are all blue, just like the effectors. So you just have to know that it's not the falloff that is concerned here, but it's the effector itself. And in order to understand what it does, you can't play with a plane effector, and I have to show you with more advanced effectors. So now is the time to show you a few more effectors. So let's select your effector plane, go to Other, which is the Other tab, and click on Remove Effect. Please do not ever remove anything from MoglyphFX by yourself manually, because you will end up with hundreds of expression errors. So the only way to remove an effector is by selecting it in the stack here in the effect panel and to go in the Other tab and click Remove Effect. Same from there. In this setup, I can select both my plane effector and my plane effector 2 and go to Other tab, Remove Effect. And as you can see, it has removed everything. So now if I select my text again, I can go back to normal settings, which are falloff per glyph, square, 1, 2, 3, so it's cool. And I will first show you the delay effector, which creates by default this nice glyph per glyph elastic animation on position Y. And this is pretty cool, but as you can see, it does this per character. And maybe this is not what you want for a text layer. Maybe you want by word. So in this case, you will select your effector delay and select another option here in this blue drop-down list. And I will select, for example, effector per word. And as you can see now, the animation is based on word. And now if I select it again and change it to be per line, it will be, of course, per line. Okay, so this is cool. You have plenty of options to play with delay effector. It's a pretty advanced one. I strongly advise you to have a deep look of what you can do with that in the version 3 video overview, because there is a dedicated section for the delay effector. And if I go back to the effector delay and change it to be effector per glyph again, so to retrieve this per glyph animation, I can now show you a few other things. So let's remove effector delay by going in the Other tab, clicking Remove Effect. So now it's just standard text layer and I can select it again. And if I go over the delay button, I can see in the help tip that it's written Shift will create an elastic scale apparition. So let's do that. The text layer is selected. I will hold down Shift on the keyboard and click on delay. And now, as you can see, you have this really nice perglyph animation that is bouncing on its scale. And of course, this is working on text, but it could also work in cloners setups, like a radial cloner. I can select Effectors again, shift click this button, and again, it will make my glyphs popping up like this. And if I again select my effector delay, go to other remove effect, I will show you the last shortcut assigned to delay effector, which is Shift plus Alt key on the keyboard. So if I hold down both keys and if I select my text layers, so Shift plus Alt. Okay, now if I preview the animation, I've got this really cool animation that is making each letter flickering and animate with a nice delay. And this is really cool. Just imagine how powerful it is if you want to animate some HUD and sci-fi futuristic user interface stuff. And of course, this is based on glyphs, but you can also select it again and select to be per word. So it gives that. And you can also select it and change it to be per line. And in this case, it will give this nice animation. And yeah, this is very, very cool. And if you want to tweak it further, please have a look at the dedicated section for the delay effector in the MoglyphFX version 3 video overview. So let's create a new composition for the following demonstration. And let's create a new cloner and create a grid cloner. And go back to Effectors tab. And before clicking any of these buttons, please ensure that in this mode here, you are correctly set up. So it's effector per glyph by default and not per word or per line. So effector per glyph. And now if I select my MoGlyph cloner grid, I can click on formula. And the formula gives you this really nice wavy motion by default because it's set to be transformed on its position y-axis with 100 pixels in value, and this is why it's moving up and down. And it's moving as a wavy curve because in the effector you have the curve animation, and it's set to be curve animation, to be waves, okay? And you have plenty of options to play with, so you can have maybe a frequency that is smaller, like that, which gives this nice bigger wave animation. And you can have something that is faster or slower. So if I decrease the speed, it will be, of course, slower, like that. Or I can have something that is faster if I increase this value. And you also have some really nice new additions coming from the new version 4 of MoglyphFX, like the time variation. So if I play with time variation, I can have something like that, which is really, really cool. And let's decrease again the speed. So something like 4, value by default. And I also have some nice new curve formulas. So I can change it to be bounce, spikes, blocks, or sawtooth. Sawtooth is really cool because it gives you this nice perpetual motion. And I love to use this one and to play with parameters, transform, visibility set to 0 to create all kind of particle animation. So if I play that now, as you can see, it almost recreates the Matrix movie effect with those nice numbers and codes that are raining from top to bottom. So this is really cool. There are a lot to discover in the new Formula Effector introduced in MoGlyph version 4, but again, this is just a quick start tutorial, so I won't dive too much in these settings. If you want to learn more about the Formula Effector and its incredible new possibilities, please refer to the dedicated section of the version 4 video overview. So just to let you know, if I select my Effector formula, go to Other, remove the effect, go back to Effectors, there are also some shortcuts assigned to this one. So if I select it and shift click on formula, it will do an N selection, which is very interesting too. And now if I go to Effector, as you can see, it has changed its mode not to curve animation, but to N selection. And you can then play with the end selection option here and play with the count. And if I type 3 instead of 2, as you can see, I have made a red color for every 3 clones, which is very nice. And I can offset them thanks to the selection offset here. And I can create all kind of cool animations based on that. Of course, you are not bound to have just a red color. You can still go to parameters and maybe change the glyph, for example. So if I type modify glyph 51, I know that it will be a circle, for example, but you can still play with that and have any kind of other glyph. Again, this is defined by the add new glyph glyph panel here. So if I want to have maybe this one instead of the red color here, I can go over with my cursor and read the glyph ID, which is 39 in this case. So just typing 39 in modify glyph will change my glyph to be this nice cross. And if I again select my effector formula, go to other, remove the effect, go to effectors again, I can then select my MoglyphF cloner grid. And there is another shortcut that I can use, which is holding down the Alt and the Shift key, so both of the keys on the keyboard, and clicking this button again. And it will, instead of doing this wavy animation on or end selection, it will rotate them by 90 degrees randomly, but you can't see that right now because the glyph is uniform in shape and it's a square, so a square turned to 90 degrees won't change. So instead of doing that, I will remove my cloner and select another font, maybe select this MoGlyph directional font, which is plenty of arrows. So I will select this, click on Grid Cloner again. And now if I click on Add New Glyph, I can select maybe this nice arrow shape. And now I've got something that I can analyze the rotation. So select your cloner again, go to Effectors, hold down both the Shift and the Alt key on the keyboard and click on Formula. And as you can see, it has randomly changed the direction of each glyph, which is incredibly useful too. So right now it's either pointing toward the top, the bottom, the right and the left, because there are 4 different directions available. And you can change that by going inside the effector. As you can see, it has changed to random direction. I can deploy the random direction option and play with the directions possibilities, which is 4 by default. But if I type 8, you will see some arrows pointing also in the corners. And if you have maybe a triangle, you can change the directions to be something like 3 or 6, for example. And now you have exactly 0 degrees, 120 degrees and 240 degrees. So this can be useful in a lot of situations. So this is it for the Formula Effector. Let's remove it. And you can also use a Random Effector to add chaos to your cloner setup. So let's do that. Select your cloner and click on Random. And it will by default randomize the scale and the fill color hue of your clones. And by default, this is animated. And it will be looped depending on the duration of your composition. So as you can see, this is a perfect loop. So this is really interesting. And maybe you don't want to have this animation. I can then go to the effector group of the effector random and play with the animation speed. Maybe you don't want to be animated. So I can type 0 and now it's perfectly still. And maybe you don't want the hue color to be changed. So you can go to parameters, style and 0 out the fill hue, and this is because there are 1 full turn of color hue value here. So if I 0 the number of turn, it won't affect the color at all. But you can also go to transform, and if you don't want to scale them, you can 0 out the scale X too. By default, both scale X and scale Y are linked thanks to this checkbox here. You can unlink them if you want to. So in this case, you can play with scale X and play with the scale Y independently. And let's undo that and check this again. And if I 0 the scale X, it won't change anything, but I can also rotate on Z. And now I have rotated all my glyphs randomly. And I can also, if I undo that, play with the position X and Y. and if I uncheck link dimensions, I can play with both dimensions separately, which is also very great. So this is the effector you would want to use if you want to add some chaos. And let's remove that. Remove effect in other tab. And the sound effector, mask effector, and shader effector are really more complicated, so I won't talk that much about them right now. It's just a quick start tutorial, but please refer to the corresponding sections of version 3 video overview for the sound effector and version 4 of MoglyphFX video overview for both mask and shader effectors, because these are two new options. And then you have the Step Effector. So if I select my clone grid, click on Step Effector, as you can see from the first clone to the very last, you will be able to transform them progressively, which is awesome. And in order maybe to fully understand what's going on here, I will hide this guy here and create a simple linear cloner, or maybe the radial cloner is sufficient to understand what's going on. So if I change this to be MoGlyph basic geometry, I can select this square and add a bit more to the count, so maybe 8. And right now, if I go to Effectors and click on Step Effector, as you can see, the first clone is this one, and the last one is this one. And as you can see, squares are progressively transitioning to fading opacity. I can show you thanks to the transparency grid. And they are also rescaling on Y, and this is because by default, the effector step has its parameter set to transform scale Y 100%, but if I zero this out, it's reducing the scale to the normal scale. And if I play with the visibility, which is set to 25, I can put 100, and in this case, it won't change anything, but you can play with anything you want. So it can be position X. In this case, you will end up with a nice spiral shape. You can scale them on either axis. You can skew them. You can rotate them on Z, for example. You can style them with other color if needed. And you can add some stroke thickness. You can maybe change the offset the glyph, sorry. And yeah, this is very, very cool. And this is, if I undo that, all due to, let's say, for this sake, I will demonstrate with, again, another type of cloner. So linear, I will hold down Shift and Alt. And if I go to per step transform and zero out the position Y and add more glyphs. Okay, so if I go back to Effectors, click on Step, play with the transform anchor point here to have something that is perfectly aligned on the bottom. So Y center, I will put exactly 100% in transform anchor point. And if I play with the transform of the effector step and I increase the scale and put my whole cloner layer a bit lower on the comp, I can see that it's a perfect histogram, and I can have a full control over the interpolation of this. To do that, I can select my cloner, type U on the keyboard, and you will see 2 keyframes. And you can easy ease this keyframe. And now, as you can see, there is a smooth interpolation between the first and the last. And if you go selecting your keyframes, and if you go in the curve editor, you can change this curve in order to fully change the shape of the interpolation, which is incredibly powerful. So yeah, this is it for the Step Effector. Really interesting, really cool. Another use of the Step Effector, if you want to see a cool example, is to create some, if I draw a Bezier line here, if I select it, if I select the cloners, Spline Cloner with Shift key, so I've got my clones along the path. I can have way more in the count, let's say 200, which is a lot, but it can handle that. Let's change a bit the path of this. And I can select my MoGlyph Cloner Spline again and go to transform and have the same color for fill color and stroke color. And I can select my MoGlyph Cloner Spline and go to Effectors, Step, and I will go to parameters. I will not transform the scale Y, so I will zero the scale Y. And I don't want neither the visibility to be affected, so I will put 100% in visibility. And I will go to the style and I will define my own colors. And this way I can define my own colors for the start and the end of my clones. And this way you can create really smooth and nice gradients along shapes. This is a really nice use case. Okay, so last one I wanted to show you is the Time Effector. So the Time Effector is really simple. It allows you to create, if I select a grid cloner with, again, this MoGlyph directional grid of that, and click on Add New Glyph and select again this nice arrow. And with that MoGlyph cloner selected, I will just go to Effectors and click on Time. And the Time Effector basically is just rotating all your clones depending on time, and there isn't any keyframes, so this is cool. And this is also changing the fill hue color of your clones. And it gives you this really nice motion. Okay, and this is the end for the effectors. I think I've covered almost everything. At least you have a sufficient knowledge now to start using MoglyphFX and to begin exploring its possibilities. So there are a lot of other cool stuff to explore, but again, please refer to the latest version of MoglyphFX video overviews, and in this case it will be the version 4. So I'd strongly advise you to have a look at all of this educational content. Even if it's long, it's really worth it. So you could learn to create your custom font for MoglyphFX. You can learn about the new cool target glyphs and connect glyphs, and the DMAR project, which is available for anyone to explore and start searching for examples. So let me show you. If I click on that, I have 50 projects to play with and to discover. So maybe I can show you the DNA helix loop, for example, and I can import the selected project and it will open it for me. And as you can see, there is a nice project that I can dive in and try to retro-engineer what has been done in order for me to learn. And yeah, you can play with all that. And it will be conveniently organized in your project here in the MoglyphFX assets folder. And if I click again on this, you will have a lot to discover. Let's say maybe, for example, this nice light speed tunnel loop. And yeah, really interesting effect too. And of course, something very useful for motion design, and all based in one single text layer thanks to MoglyphFX possibilities. We have now reached the end of this quick start tutorial, and if you like MoglyphFX and if you use it in production, please share what you have done with it. Please like, comment and spread your love for MoglyphFX on your social networks, and see you later for other cool stuff. Bye guys!